The property surveyor's face went pale as he rechecked his measurements for the third time, looked at me, then back at the massive warehouse the HOA had just finished constructing 20 feet onto my land. I am Frank Owens, and I had been living peacefully on my 15-acre property in Mooresville, North Carolina for the past 8 years. The land had been in my family for 3 generations, passed down from my grandfather who bought it back in 1967 when this area was nothing but farmland and forest. Now, suburban sprawl had crept in, and 5 years ago, a planned community called Riverside Estates had been developed right up against my eastern property line. With the development came an HOA, and with the HOA came trouble. The trouble had a name: Patricia Garrison, president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. She was a 52-year-old woman with a blonde bob haircut that looked like it required weekly maintenance at an expensive salon, designer sunglasses perpetually perched on top of her head, and an attitude that suggested the entire world existed solely to inconvenience her. From the moment the first houses in Riverside Estates sold, Patricia made it clear she viewed my property as an eyesore that damaged her community's property values. My land was rural, simple. I had my house, a workshop, a small barn, and plenty of open space where I could breathe. I worked from home as a software consultant, which gave me the freedom to enjoy the quiet life I had built. I kept my grass cut where it needed to be cut, my buildings maintained, and I bothered absolutely nobody. But that was not good enough for Patricia. The harassment started small. She would knock on my door with printed photos of my property taken from the road, circling areas where she thought my grass was too long or where equipment was visible. I would politely remind her that I was not part of her HOA, that my property predated her development by decades, and that she had no authority over what I did on my own land. These conversations never went well. Patricia was not accustomed to hearing the word no. Then came the letters. Official-looking documents on Riverside Estates, HOA letterhead, citing county codes that did not apply to my property, threatening fines I did not owe, demanding I attend HOA meetings I had no obligation to join. I ignored most of them, but when they threatened legal action, I consulted with my attorney, Maxwell Hayes, a sharp guy about my age who had handled my family's legal matters for years. Maxwell sent them a cease and desist letter, clearly outlining that I was not subject to their covenants and that continued harassment would result in legal action from my end. That bought me about 6 months of peace. During that quiet period, I noticed Patricia and several HOA board members walking along what they thought was the boundary between my property and the community's common areas. They would stand there with clipboards, pointing, measuring, having animated discussions. I did not think much of it at first. People in HOAs loved their meetings and their clipboards. Then, one Monday morning in late March, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I pulled on jeans and a jacket and walked toward the noise. On what I knew was my property, there was an excavation crew breaking ground. 2 bulldozers, an excavator, several workers in hard hats, and a construction trailer with a sign that read, Riverside Estates Community Warehouse Project. I walked straight up to the construction foreman, a thick-necked guy named Eddie who looked like he had been doing this work for 30 years. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "I think there has been a mistake. This is private property. You are on my land." Eddie pulled out a rolled set of plans and spread them on the hood of his truck. "According to this site plan, we are on Riverside Estates HOA property, parcel number R447B. Got all the permits approved through the county." "Can I see that?" I asked. He showed me the documents. Sure enough, The plans showed this area designated as HOA common property. The survey markers on the plan did not match reality, but the paperwork looked official. Someone had gotten permits approved based on incorrect property information. Look, Eddie, I am telling you right now, this is my land. I have the deed, I have surveys, I have everything to prove it. If you continue construction, the HOA is going to be liable for a massive lawsuit, and you might be too. Eddie scratched his chin, looking uncomfortable. I just go where they tell me to go, man. You need to take this up with whoever hired us. That would be Patricia Garrison at the HOA. Of course it was. I immediately called Maxwell Hayes. He was in court that morning but called me back during a recess. I explained the situation. Do not let them continue, he said. Get out there and document everything. Take photos, take video, get names. I will file for an emergency injunction this afternoon. But when I went back outside, I made a decision that Maxwell would probably not have approved of. I watched the construction crew setting up, marking lines, preparing to dig the foundation. And I thought about Patricia Garrison's smug face every time she had shown up at my door. I thought about her entitled attitude, her certainty that she could just take whatever she wanted. An idea formed. It was petty. It was risky. But the look on Patricia's face when this all came crashing down would be absolutely worth it. I walked back over to Eddie. You know what? I am going to go check my property records. Maybe I am wrong about the boundary. You guys go ahead. Eddie looked relieved. Sure thing, buddy. I called Maxwell back. Hold off on the injunction. What, Frank? They are building on your property illegally. I know, but I want to see how far they will take this. Document everything, prepare all the legal paperwork, but do not file it yet. I want them fully committed before we pull the rug out. Maxwell was quiet for a long moment. You are playing a dangerous game. The longer they build, the more complicated this gets. Trust me, I said. Over the next few weeks, I watched the warehouse go up. It was not a small structure. The foundation alone was 40 by 60 feet, commercial-grade concrete, proper drainage, the whole works. Patricia had gotten the HOA to approve serious money for this project. I later learned it was meant to store community maintenance equipment, holiday decorations, and serve as a distribution center for the community's bulk purchasing program. Riverside Estates was one of those upscale HOAs where they provided services to justify their outrageous monthly fees. I documented everything. I took photos every single day showing the progress. I recorded videos with timestamps. I kept every piece of mail the HOA sent to residents about the exciting new warehouse facility. I even attended one of their open meetings, where Patricia gave a PowerPoint presentation about how the warehouse would serve the community for decades to come. At that meeting, I sat in the back row and listened to Patricia describe the project's budget. $240,000, funded by a special assessment on all Riverside Estates homes. The residents were not happy about the extra fees, but Patricia assured them it was a wise investment in their community's infrastructure. She clicked to a slide showing the warehouse's location. As you can see, we have strategically placed this facility on HOA common land adjacent to the Owens property. Some of you may have noticed that Mr. Owens has been less than cooperative with our community standards in the past. This warehouse will serve as a buffer, improving sight lines and property values for our eastern-facing homes. I almost laughed out loud. She was not just building on my property by mistake. She thought she was teaching me a lesson by blocking the view of my eyesore property from her precious community. A hand went up in the audience. Did we need approval from Mr. Owens for this construction? Mr. Owens has no say in what we build on HOA property, Patricia said with a tight smile. We have followed all county regulations and secured all necessary permits. Another resident asked, "Are we sure about the property lines?" I thought the Owens land extended further east than our common areas. Patricia's smile never wavered. We conducted a thorough survey. The warehouse is completely within HOA boundaries. Now, let's move on to the next agenda item. I left the meeting and immediately sent Maxwell all my documentation. "They are all in," I told him. "Every homeowner in Riverside Estates thinks they own this warehouse. Patricia has their money, and she is lying to their faces about the property lines." "This is going to be ugly," Maxwell said, but I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Lawyers loved a good property dispute, especially when the facts were overwhelmingly on their client's side. "How long until we move?" I asked. "Let's wait until they finish construction and move equipment in. You wanted them committed. Let them fully invest in this mistake." Construction continued through April and into May. The warehouse took shape quickly. Professional contractors, quality materials, real attention to detail. By mid-May, the exterior was complete, painted a tasteful gray that matched the Riverside Estates community aesthetic. They installed security lighting, paved a small access road connecting to the community's maintenance area, and added landscaping around the perimeter. In early June, I watched as they began moving equipment inside. Industrial lawn mowers, hedge trimmers, leaf blowers, pressure washers, generators, tools of every description. Pallets of supplies were delivered. Cases of light bulbs, paint, fertilizer, pool chemicals for the community pool. They installed shelving units and a small office area inside for the maintenance supervisor. Patricia herself was often on site, directing the setup with her clipboard and her imperious gestures. I watched from my property line, making no secret of my presence but offering no comment. One afternoon, she actually walked over to me. "Mr. Owens, I hope our construction noise has not been too disruptive." It was the most civil she had ever been to me, which should have been my warning that she was up to something. "Not at all," I said. "It is a nice building." "Must have cost a fortune." "Investments in community infrastructure always pay dividends," she said. "Perhaps you can appreciate the improved aesthetics from your property." "Oh, I appreciate it," I said. "Really, I do." She gave me a suspicious look, trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic, then walked back to supervise the unloading of a delivery truck filled with decorated bins labeled with holidays. Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. The HOA apparently went all out with seasonal decorations for their community entrance and common areas. By the third week of June, the warehouse was fully stocked and operational. The community maintenance crew was working out of it daily. I estimated the total investment, including construction, equipment, and supplies, was somewhere north of $300,000 when all was said and done. That is when I called Maxwell. "It is time." We had all our documentation prepared. Maxwell had actually hired a professional surveyor to come out and verify the property lines with GPS precision. The results confirmed what I already knew. The warehouse was built entirely on my property, with the nearest edge a good 20 feet past the actual property line. Maxwell filed multiple legal actions simultaneously. First, a cease and desist order to halt all HOA operations on my property. Second, a demand for removal of all structures and equipment. Third, a lawsuit for trespass, property damage, and compensation. And fourth, the most satisfying piece, formal eviction papers for the unauthorized structure and all its contents. The papers were served on a Wednesday morning. I made sure to be visible on my property when the process server showed up at the warehouse and handed the documents to the maintenance supervisor. A confused guy named Tim who had no idea what was happening. Within an hour, Patricia's Mercedes came flying up the access road. She got out of her car holding the legal papers, her face red with fury. I was ready, standing right at the actual property line with my own copies of the survey documents. "What is this?" she screamed, waving the papers at me. "That is an eviction notice. You built on my property. I want you off it. This is HOA land. We have surveys. We have permits. You have fraudulent surveys and permits based on incorrect information," I said calmly. "My family has owned this land since 1967. I have title, deed, and a professional survey completed 2 weeks ago that proves your warehouse is entirely on my property." "That is impossible. We would never." "You did. And now you need to remove it." Patricia's hands were shaking. "This is harassment. This is retaliation because you are angry about community standards. This is property law. You built a $300,000 warehouse on land you do not own. Every day you operated it, you were trespassing. Every piece of equipment in there you stored on my property without permission. We will fight this. Our attorneys will bury you. Your attorneys will tell you that you have no case. But please fight it. Discovery will be very interesting, especially when we examine how your so-called survey got approved and who falsified the property records submitted to the county." That hit home. Patricia's expression changed from fury to something closer to panic. "I did not falsify anything. We hired a surveying company. They provided the documentation. Then I guess you were defrauded and you should take it up with them. Either way, the warehouse is on my property, and it needs to be removed within 30 days as stated in the eviction order. If it is not, the contents become my property according to North Carolina abandonment statutes." I was bluffing slightly on that last part, but Patricia did not need to know that. She stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish, then stormed back to her car and peeled out, throwing gravel everywhere. Maxwell called me an hour later, laughing. "I just got off the phone with the HOA's attorney. He is very concerned. Apparently, Patricia never mentioned to him that there was any question about property boundaries. She probably thought I would never check or never fight back. Well, they want to negotiate. They are offering to pay rent for use of your property going forward. Not interested. They are offering to relocate the warehouse and pay damages. Still not interested. I want them out and I want this to go through the courts. Patricia needs to face consequences." Maxwell paused. "You are really enjoying this. You have no idea." The legal process moved faster than I expected. The HOA hired a legitimate surveyor who confirmed what my survey showed. The warehouse was completely on my property. There was no gray area, no boundary dispute. It was a clear-cut case of unauthorized construction on someone else's land. The HOA's attorney reached out multiple times trying to settle, offering increasingly large payments. They offered $50,000, then $75,000, then $100,000 just to let them keep the warehouse on my property with a long-term lease. I turned down every offer. What I had not anticipated was how fast the situation would turn into a full-blown community crisis for Riverside Estates. Word spread among the residents about what happened. Many of them had paid the special assessment to fund the warehouse. Now they were learning their HOA president had built it on someone else's property, and their entire investment was at risk. An emergency HOA meeting was called. I did not attend, but several residents I had spoken with kept me informed. The meeting was apparently a bloodbath. Homeowners demanding answers, demanding Patricia's resignation, demanding to know how this could have happened. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming she had relied on professional surveyors and that I was being unreasonable by not accepting their settlement offers. Some residents sided with her, arguing I was being petty and vindictive, but most were furious that their money had been wasted on illegal construction. One resident, a retired attorney named George Pemberton, apparently stood up and delivered a scathing review of Patricia's leadership. "This is not about Frank Owens being difficult," he said. "This is about catastrophic negligence and possibly fraud. Patricia, did you or did you not verify the property boundaries before breaking ground on a $300,000 construction project?" According to my sources, Patricia had gone pale and said, "We hired a surveying company that came recommended. They provided documentation that showed the land was within HOA boundaries." "What company?" George had demanded. Patricia named a company called Precision Land Surveys, LLC. George had apparently pulled out his phone right there in the meeting and searched for the company. "This company was founded 8 months ago, has no established track record, and their business registration lists an address that is a UPS store mailbox. Who recommended them to you?" Patricia apparently had no good answer. That is when things took a turn I had not expected. George Pemberton came to visit me the next day. He was a tall, dignified man in his 70s with silver hair and a firm handshake. "Mr. Owens, I want to apologize on behalf of the Riverside Estates community," he said. "What has happened here is unconscionable. I am not here to ask you to settle or to negotiate. I am here to tell you that several residents, myself included, are conducting our own investigation into how this occurred." "I appreciate that," I said, inviting him in for coffee. We sat in my kitchen, and George laid out what he had discovered. "I spent 30 years practicing real estate law before I retired. Something about this whole situation smelled wrong, so I started digging. That surveying company Patricia used, it was created specifically for this project. The owner is Patricia's brother-in-law, Roger Garrison. You are kidding." "I am not. Roger has no surveying credentials, no professional certifications. He created a shell company, produced fraudulent documents, and Patricia used those documents to obtain construction permits. This was not negligence. This was deliberate." I felt my stomach drop. "She knowingly built on my property." "I believe so, yes. I think she genuinely believed you would not fight back, or that you would not have resources to properly survey and prove the trespass. I think she planned to present you with a fait accompli and pressure you into accepting minimal compensation or just giving up. That is insane. That is Patricia. She has been problem since she took over as HOA president 3 years ago. She rules by intimidation and has driven off anyone who questions her. This warehouse project was her pet initiative, and she was not going to let something like property rights stand in her way." George handed me a folder. "This is everything I have found so far. I am providing it to you and your attorney. I am also filing a complaint with the North Carolina State Bar because the attorney who filed those permits on behalf of the HOA should have verified the survey information." I looked through the folder. It was thorough, damning documentation of what appeared to be a conspiracy to commit fraud. "What do you want from me?" I asked George. "I want you to pursue this fully. Patricia needs to be removed from the HOA and held accountable. She has spent $300,000 of our money on an illegal building that now has to be demolished. She has exposed our HOA to massive legal liability, and if she did this deliberately, she has committed fraud. I want her prosecuted. I will talk to my attorney." Maxwell was very interested in George's documentation. We met at his office the next day to review everything. "This changes the case significantly," Maxwell said. "If Patricia knowingly used fraudulent survey documents to build on your property, that is not just civil trespass anymore. That is potentially criminal. What are we talking about? Fraud, possibly theft by deception, unauthorized construction, falsifying documents submitted to the county. North Carolina takes this stuff seriously, especially when it involves public permits and large sums of money. So what is our next move? We keep pushing the civil case, but I am also going to refer this to the Iredell County District Attorney's Office. They have a white-collar crime division that handles this sort of thing. Over the next few weeks, everything escalated rapidly. The civil case proceeded toward a hearing where a judge would rule on the eviction order and damages. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office opened an investigation into Patricia and Roger Garrison. The Riverside Estates HOA board voted to suspend Patricia pending the outcome of the investigations. They also voted to accept my demand for removal of the warehouse and appointed a committee to oversee the process. But Patricia was not going down without a fight. She started a whisper campaign in the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I was a vindictive jerk who was destroying their community over a minor boundary dispute. She claimed the survey discrepancy was just a few feet and that I was exploiting a technicality. She conveniently left out the part about her brother-in-law's fake surveying company. Some residents believed her. I started getting angry calls and emails from Riverside Estates homeowners. One particularly nasty voicemail accused me of being a selfish hermit who wanted to ruin their property values out of spite. But more residents sided with me, especially after George Pemberton circulated his findings to the community. A splinter group formed demanding Patricia's immediate removal and threatening their own lawsuit against her for mismanagement of HOA funds. The situation reached a head in mid-July when the civil hearing took place. The courtroom was packed with Riverside Estates residents, split between Patricia's supporters and her detractors. I sat with Maxwell at the plaintiff's table. Patricia sat with her attorney, a nervous-looking guy who clearly wished he was anywhere else. The judge, the Honorable Sandra Martinez, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. Maxwell presented our case methodically, property records dating back to 1967. The original deed, multiple surveys, photographs showing the warehouse's location on my property, documentation of the HOA's permits and their fraudulent survey. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that there was an honest mistake, that his client had relied on professional surveying services, and that the HOA was willing to make substantial restitution. Judge Martinez cut him off. "Counselor, I have reviewed the evidence. This is not a boundary dispute where there is legitimate disagreement about property lines. This is a case where a structure was built entirely on property owned by the plaintiff with no permission, no easement, and no legal right. The only question before this court is remedies." She turned to Patricia. "Miss Garrison, did you personally verify the property boundaries before authorizing construction?" Patricia stood. "Your Honor, I relied on survey documentation provided by a licensed professional." "Was that professional your brother-in-law who created a company 8 months ago with no actual surveying credentials?" Patricia went pale. "I was told he was qualified." "By whom?" Patricia did not answer. Judge Martinez looked at the documents in front of her. "Miss Garrison, this court is not ruling on potential criminal charges, but I am deeply troubled by what appears to be either incompetence or deliberate deception. You authorized the expenditure of hundreds of thousands of dollars of HOA funds to build on property you did not own, using survey documents that any due diligence would have revealed were questionable at best." She ruled from the bench. The eviction order was granted. The HOA had 60 days to remove the warehouse and all contents from my property. I was awarded damages for trespass, property damage from the construction, and legal fees. The total came to $95,000. Additionally, Judge Martinez ordered that the HOA could not assess residents to pay the judgment. It had to come from HOA reserves or from Patricia personally if the HOA board chose to pursue recovery against her. Outside the courthouse, Patricia tried to approach me. Maxwell stepped between us. "You have destroyed our community," she hissed at me. "No," I said. "You did that all by yourself when you decided to build on property you did not own." "I was trying to improve property values. Your land is an eyesore that damages everyone around you. My land is my land. You do not get to take it just because you do not like how it looks." A reporter from the Mooresville Tribune was there, having gotten wind of the story. She approached with a photographer. "Mr. Owens, can we ask you a few questions?" I gave a brief interview, sticking to the facts. Patricia tried to give her own interview, but her attorney pulled her away, probably realizing she was just digging herself deeper. The story ran the next day under the headline, "HOA ordered to remove warehouse built on private property." It was fair and factual, laying out the timeline and the court's ruling. Within hours, it was picked up by regional news outlets, and by the weekend, it had gone viral on social media. People loved the story. The comments sections were filled with HOA horror stories and people celebrating what they saw as a victory against overreach. I started getting interview requests from news channels and podcasts. I turned most of them down, but I did one interview with a local TV station because I wanted people to understand this was not about being difficult. It was about property rights and holding people accountable for their actions. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. I explained calmly how the HOA had built on my property without permission, how I had discovered the survey fraud, and how Patricia had refused to acknowledge wrongdoing even after being caught. The reporter asked, "Some people say you should have just accepted a settlement. Why pursue this all the way through court?" Because Patricia Garrison needed to learn that she cannot just take what she wants. She spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of her neighbor's money on an illegal building rather than admitting a mistake. That kind of arrogance and abuse of power has consequences. The interview must have struck a nerve. The district attorney's office announced the next week that Patricia Garrison and Roger Garrison were being charged with fraud, submitting false documents to government agencies, and conspiracy. Roger was also charged with practicing land surveying without a license, which was apparently a separate criminal offense in North Carolina. Patricia's world unraveled quickly after that. The HOA board voted to remove her as president and appointed George Pemberton as interim president. The board also filed a civil suit against Patricia seeking to recover the money she had cost them through her negligence and fraud. Her husband, a dentist who had apparently been unaware of her schemes, filed for divorce. Meanwhile, the warehouse still sat on my property. The HOA had contracted with a demolition company to remove it, but the process was slow. They had to carefully remove all the equipment and supplies first, which took several weeks. I watched the steady stream of trucks hauling away mowers, tools, decorations, and materials. George Pemberton kept me updated throughout. "We have recovered most of the equipment," he told me during one of his visits. "The warehouse structure itself will be demolished starting next week. I want to personally apologize again for everything you have been through." "I appreciate that, George. You have been stand-up through all this. I am just sorry it took this long for reasonable people to realize what Patricia was doing. She had a way of steamrolling anyone who questioned her." "Well, she picked the wrong property to steamroll on," George smiled. "That she did." The demolition took 2 weeks. It was satisfying to watch in a petty sort of way. The building that had been constructed so carefully was torn apart piece by piece, hauled away in dumpsters and on flatbed trucks. By early September, all that remained was a bare concrete foundation. "What do you want us to do with the foundation?" George asked. "We can break it up and remove it, or if you want, we could leave it. It is good concrete work." I thought about it. "Leave it. I might find a use for it." "Fair enough. We will clean up the site, reseed the grass, and make sure everything is restored as close as possible to how it was." The criminal case against Patricia and Roger moved through the system over the following months. Both were offered plea deals. Roger took his immediately, pleading guilty to practicing land surveying without a license and fraud. He got 2 years probation, a substantial fine, and was permanently barred from any work involving land surveying or real estate in North Carolina. Patricia held out longer, apparently still convinced she could talk her way out of consequences. But the evidence was overwhelming. In November, facing the likelihood of a jury conviction and actual prison time, she accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to fraud and submitting false documents. She was sentenced to 1 year in county jail, 3 years probation, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and to me for damages not covered by the civil judgment. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked diminished, standing before the judge in a plain outfit, none of her former swagger visible. When given a chance to speak, she offered a brief apology that sounded rehearsed and insincere. Judge Martinez was not impressed. "Miss Garrison, you held a position of trust in your community. Rather than serving your neighbors with integrity, you abused that trust for your own ego. You spent their money recklessly, you committed fraud to avoid admitting a mistake, and you showed no remorse until you were facing prison. I hope you use your time in custody to reflect on the harm you have caused." Patricia was led away in handcuffs. I felt no satisfaction in seeing her go to jail, but I felt justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, George Pemberton shook my hand. "Thank you for seeing this through. Patricia needed to face consequences, and you made that happen. I just protected my property rights. You did more than that. You held someone powerful accountable. That matters." The Riverside Estates HOA under George's leadership turned out to be reasonable and professional. They paid every penny they owed me promptly. They restored my property line area to pristine condition. George even came by with a fruit basket and a handwritten note from the HOA board thanking me for my patience during the cleanup process. "We are also implementing new procedures to make sure nothing like this ever happens again," George told me. "Every major expenditure now requires independent verification by at least 2 board members. Any construction project near property boundaries requires professional survey work from established, credentialed firms, and we have instituted term limits for board positions so no one person can accumulate too much power." "Sounds like you are running things right." "We are trying. Most of our residents are good people who just want a nice place to live." Patricia gave HOAs a bad name, but done correctly, they can actually add value to a community. I did not mention that I would never voluntarily live in an HOA, but I appreciated George's sincerity. As fall turned to winter, life returned to normal. The exposed foundation on my property gave me an idea, and I hired contractors to build a large workshop on it. Since the concrete work was already done, the construction was relatively quick and inexpensive. By December, I had a beautiful new workspace for my hobbies and projects, all paid for by the settlement money from the HOA. The irony was not lost on me. Patricia had tried to build on my property to spite me, and the end result was that I got a brand new workshop essentially for free. Maxwell Hayes stopped by to see the completed workshop. "You know, Frank, I have been practicing law for 20 years, and this is probably the most satisfying case I have ever worked on. Because we won. Because justice actually happened. The bad guys faced real consequences. The good guys got made whole. That does not happen as often as it should." We stood in my new workshop, warm despite the December cold outside, and I reflected on the past year. It had been stressful, time-consuming, and frustrating. But I had stood my ground, protected what was mine, and proven that entitled bullies like Patricia Garrison could not just take whatever they wanted. The Riverside Estates community continued to thrive under new leadership. Property values actually increased once word spread that the HOA was being run competently and ethically. Several residents who had been thinking of selling decided to stay. I even developed a cordial relationship with some of my HOA neighbors. A couple who lived in one of the houses that faced my property invited me to a cookout, and we had a pleasant evening. They apologized for not speaking up sooner when Patricia was causing problems. "We should have said something," the husband, Tom, told me. "We knew she was out of control, but it is easier to just keep your head down and hope someone else deals with it." "I get it," I said. "Standing up to people like Patricia is not easy." "Well, you did it, and we are all better off for it. Thank you." As I settled into my new workshop that winter, organizing tools and setting up workbenches, I thought about everything that had happened. Patricia had seen my property as an eyesore, something that needed to be hidden or controlled. She had been so convinced of her own righteousness that she had committed crimes rather than respect basic property rights. But in the end, my simple property had stood firm. 3 generations of my family had owned this land, and it would be here long after Patricia Garrison was forgotten. I fired up the new heating system in the workshop and got to work on a wood project I had been planning. Outside, snow began to fall, covering my 15 acres in white. Across the property line, the lights of Riverside Estates twinkled in the dusk. It was peaceful. It was mine. And no one was going to take it away. The legal aftermath continued into the following year, though at a much slower pace. Patricia tried to appeal her sentence, but her appeal was denied. She served her full year in county jail and was released on probation in late 2025. I heard through George that she had moved away from Mooresville, relocating somewhere in Florida, where presumably no one knew her history. Roger Garrison also left the area after completing his probation. The shell company he had created was dissolved, and he faced ongoing civil suits from several parties who had been harmed by his fraudulent survey work, not just the HOA. The HOA's lawsuit against Patricia for recovery of funds was partially successful. They obtained a judgment, but collecting on it proved difficult. Patricia's assets had been depleted by legal fees and the divorce settlement. The HOA eventually recovered about 40 cents on the dollar, which George told me was better than expected. "Most of the residents have accepted it as an expensive lesson," George said. "We now do background checks on board members and require financial transparency that we should have had all along. As for me, I continued living my quiet life on my property. The workshop became my favorite place, somewhere I could work on projects, think, and enjoy the space I had fought to protect. I built furniture, worked on small engines, and generally enjoyed having a dedicated space for all my hobbies." The story of the HOA warehouse had a long tail on the internet. It became one of those legendary tales that people shared on forums and social media whenever HOA horror stories came up. I was occasionally recognized when I went into Mooresville, usually by someone who wanted to shake my hand and tell me about their own HOA nightmare. I always listened politely, offered sympathy, and generally encouraged people to know their rights and stand their ground when they were in the right. One day in March, almost exactly a year after the construction had started, I was working in my shop when I heard a car pull up. It was a young woman, maybe late 20s, with a notebook and a professional camera. "Mr. Owens, my name is Jennifer Keene. I am writing a book about property rights conflicts in America, and I would love to include your story if you are willing." I invited her in, and we talked for a couple of hours. She was smart, well-researched, and genuinely interested in the broader issues the case raised about HOA power, property rights, and accountability. "What strikes me about your case," Jennifer said, "is that you had every opportunity to just take a settlement and move on. You could have made this go away quickly and quietly. Why did you choose to fight?" I thought about it. Because Patricia Garrison needed to learn that actions have consequences. She spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of other people's money to build on land she did not own, and she did it because she thought she could get away with it. If I had just taken a settlement, she would have learned that bullying and fraud work. She needed to learn the opposite lesson. And the year in jail, I did not push for that. The district attorney did based on the evidence of fraud. But honestly, I think it was appropriate. She committed crimes. Criminals go to jail. If she had been just negligent, just made an honest mistake, this would have been a civil case only. But she deliberately used fraudulent documents to build on my property. That crosses a line. Jennifer included my story in her book, which was published the following year. It was a fair and thorough account, and I was pleased with how she presented the facts without sensationalizing them. Life moved on. The seasons changed. My property remained mine, undisturbed by HOA overreach or entitled neighbors. I continued my work as a software consultant, enjoyed my workshop, and lived the quiet life I had always wanted. Sometimes, when I was working in the shop that had been built on the foundation Patricia's warehouse left behind, I thought about the absurdity of the whole situation. She had tried so hard to spite me, to diminish my property, to prove she had power over me. And in the end, all she had done was given me a free foundation for the workshop I had always wanted. There was justice in that. A poetic kind of karma that pleased me more than any court judgment or prison sentence ever could. George Pemberton remained president of the Riverside Estates HOA and did an excellent job. The community flourished under his steady, ethical leadership. He stopped by occasionally to chat, and we developed a genuine friendship despite the rocky start between me and his community. "You know," he told me one afternoon as we sat on my porch drinking beer, "Patricia did one good thing, even if she did not mean to." "What is that?" She woke us up. Our whole community was sleepwalking, letting one person make all the decisions, not paying attention to where our money went or what was being done in our name. Her catastrophic failure made us all realize we need to be engaged and vigilant. We are a better community now because of it. "Silver lining," I said. "More than that. Real change. Our board meetings are now attended by dozens of residents. People ask questions, demand accountability. We had 3 people run for open board positions last month. Before Patricia's downfall, those positions went unfilled because no one cared enough to run. Sounds like you are doing it right. We are trying." As the sun set over my property that evening, casting long shadows across the 15 acres that had been in my family for generations, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I had won a legal battle or because someone who wronged me had faced justice, though those things mattered. The satisfaction came from something simpler. I had protected what was mine. I had stood up for myself when it would have been easier to back down. I had proven that property rights still meant something, that bullies could still be stopped, and that justice could still prevail if you were willing to fight for it. Patricia Garrison had tried to take my land, and she had failed. The warehouse she built to spite me had become my workshop, a daily reminder that sometimes the best revenge is simply standing your ground and letting karma do the rest. My phone buzzed with a text from Maxwell. "Beer tomorrow. I have another HOA case I want to run by you for advice." I smiled and texted back, "Sure, but I am not taking on any more HOA fights. Once was enough. Just consultation. Besides, after your case, every HOA in the county is terrified of property line disputes. You might have made my job a lot easier." That night, I locked up my workshop and walked back to my house under a clear sky full of stars. My property was quiet, peaceful, exactly as it should be. No HOA meetings, no architectural review boards, no petty tyrants with clipboards telling me what I could and could not do with my own land. Just 15 acres of freedom, hard won and well defended. And that warehouse foundation, transformed into something useful, serving as a permanent monument to the fact that property rights still matter in America, and that even the most entitled HOA president cannot simply take what does not belong to them. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and life went on. Sometimes that is the best ending you can hope for.